The President of the United States wants lower interest rates. He said it for years, so he handpicked a new head of the Federal Reserve to make it happen. And then something surprising happened. That handpicked chairman looked at the economy and, in effect, said no. This is one of the most fascinating power struggles in the entire economy, and most people have no idea it's even happening. It's a fight between the White House and the Federal Reserve, and the outcome affects your mortgage, your savings, and the price of almost everything you buy. So let's break down what's really going on, why it matters, and what it means for your money. First, you need to understand the setup because this isn't really about one person. It's about attention built into the system itself. On one side, you have the president. On the other, you have the Federal Reserve, America's central bank. And they often want very different things. Let's start with why almost every president wants low interest rates. Low rates make borrowing cheap. That fuels spending, it boosts the stock market, and it makes the economy feel strong. A booming economy is great for any president, especially around election time. There's also another reason people forget. The government itself is deeply in debt, and it pays interest on that debt. When rates are low, that interest is cheaper, which saves the government enormous amounts of money. So for a president, low rates are almost always appealing. It's easy to see why they'd push for them. But here's the other side. The Federal Reserve has a completely different job. Its main mission is to keep prices stable, in other words, to control inflation. And right now, that's the problem. Inflation recently climbed to over 4%, the highest in 3 years. And here's the key thing to understand. When inflation is high, cutting interest rates is like pouring gasoline on a fire. Cheaper borrowing means more spending, and more spending pushes prices even higher. So while the president may want cuts to boost the economy, the Fed is looking at rising inflation and thinking the exact opposite. It may actually need to raise rates, not cut them. And that's where this story takes its surprising turn. The president appointed a new Fed chairman named Kevin Warsh, expecting him to deliver those rate cuts. But Warsh has spent his whole career as what's called a hawk. That's someone who prioritizes fighting inflation above almost everything else. So instead of rushing to cut rates, Warsh has signaled caution and even the possibility of hikes. In fact, traders now think there's a better than even chance that rates will be higher by the end of the year, not lower. The man chosen to bring rates down might do the exact opposite. And interestingly, as inflation kept climbing past 4%, even the White House quietly eased off its demands for immediate cuts. Because when prices are rising this fast, pushing for cuts becomes a much harder sell. Now here's the part that really matters, and it's bigger than any single president or chairman. It's a concept called Federal Reserve independence, and it's one of the most important ideas in all of economics. The Federal Reserve is designed to be independent from the White House. The president nominates its leaders, but once they're in, they're supposed to make decisions based on the economy, not on politics. Why does that matter so much? Think about it. If politicians could simply order low interest rates whenever they wanted, they'd be tempted to do it constantly to keep the economy feeling good and win elections. But that would eventually unleash runaway inflation. History is full of countries where the government controlled the money printer, and the result was prices spiraling out of control. So the Fed's independence acts like a safety brake. It allows unpopular but necessary decisions like keeping rates high to crush inflation, even when powerful people are demanding the opposite. That's exactly what we may be watching play out right now. So what does all of this mean for you? A few things. If the Fed holds firm and keeps rates high, then borrowing stays expensive. Mortgages, car loans, and credit cards remain costly. But there's an upside. Savers keep earning more interest, and inflation has a better chance of cooling down. On the other hand, if political pressure ever won out and rates were cut too soon, you might get cheaper loans in the short term, but you'd risk inflation roaring back and eating away your purchasing power. In other words, this behind-the-scenes battle directly shapes the cost of your everyday life. If this helped you make sense of the chaos, subscribe. I break down the biggest money stories of the week in plain English, no jargon, no hype.